Kia ora. Welcome to episode 81 of the SWNZ Podcast, the podcast for New Zealand Star Wars fans. My name is Matt.
And my name is Christy.
First up, we'll just take a moment to acknowledge the state of emergency that's been going on in New Zealand for a couple of weeks. We personally were affected with flooding a couple of times. We didn't suffer quite as much during Cyclone Gabrielle, but we did have some power cuts and some internet interruptions, and that is why this podcast is going out on the weekend rather than during the week. We do hope that everyone listening in has been able to stay safe, and if you're doing a cleanup, we hope that recovery is going well for you. So on the brighter side, it was another interesting week for news from a galaxy far, far away, so let's jump in and talk Star Wars. We'll talk about some of the live-action media productions shortly, but there is one press release related to an upcoming novel that I'm quite excited for. E.K. Johnston has a new book coming out, no confirmed date yet, but it's called Crimson Climb, and it is focusing on Qi'ra's story. This seems to be, based on the image given on the cover and the interpretations that can come from that, seems to span the time frame during Solo, a Star Wars story, where she is separated from Han Solo and is becoming involved within and climbing the ranks of the Crimson Dawn. I think that's going to be a really interesting story and fill a really interesting gap. I'll read the synopsis for it. Not everyone gets to be the hero. Qi'ra listened to the dreams and promises of a boy with a reckless smile, only to be torn away from him and return to the White Worm's gang while Han made his way to freedom. Now freedom seems like a luxury she can't afford while she concentrates on survival and despairs of ever leaving Corellia. But her fortunes seem to turn when a representative of the crime syndicate Crimson Dawn plucks Qi'ra from captivity and brings her to the syndicate's leader, the mysterious and mercurial Dryden Voss. Voss offers Qi'ra an opportunity she's never had before, the chance to build something resembling a comfortable life if she can prove her worth to this organization. With failure meaning certain death, Qi'ra knows she must immerse herself in the merciless, murderous world of Crimson Dawn. What she doesn't know is just who she will be if she survives.
This is a really neat book, and I wish that it had been announced sooner because I feel like it tells a story that we really wanted to see. I know I am one of those fans that really wishes that there would be a follow-up movie to Solo. I really like the characters and the dynamics in that. Obviously, Han Solo is popular, but there was so much about Qi'ra in particular that was really intriguing. There was so much about her. And
it's a big story for her to go from point A to point B. Yeah. There's a lot to be told there.
Yeah, and I think that this is really fascinating. Of course, it would have been really fun to have like a Disney Plus series sort of tracking this period of time, but at least we can get it in book form, and who knows if there'll be subsequent media adaptations further down the line. I just want to know how she makes that sort of gap. She's a very different person.
Yes,
you know, she's matured. She hints at having done things in a way that she thinks that Han wouldn't care for her anymore. And so we only get sort of little hints or let our imagination sort of fill in the gaps. But I think this could be a really good book.
Yeah. It's a tragedy to be sure, but I think it will be an interesting series of plots and narratives. We know Qi'ra's story has been expanded on in the comics as well, of course, but I think this sounds like, or I get the feeling that it's going to be a fairly tight time frame, very focused, storytelling.
She has a really interesting dynamic with Dryden Voss. There's sort of like this constant tension and this sort of really tenuous trust. She really knows how to fight and to handle herself, and when given the opportunity, she just wants to climb that rank higher. So she knows that she's like pretty in deep with Crimson Dawn. So it's a shame there's no release date to this, because this is a really tantalizing synopsis for this book. I'm very, very much looking forward to it.
So we'll stay tuned for some more information and a release date for that novel. Let's talk about live action material, like I said. Interesting. Recently, the Disney Investors Call took place. This is a streamed event where Disney shareholders get to hear about Disney's upcoming strategy for the following year and so forth. Not a lot about Star Wars was mentioned directly in the call, but on social media shortly thereafter, Bob Iger did make some comments on Disney Plus's core brand strategy. He said we're going to lean even harder into Disney, Marvel, Pixar, Star Wars, and Avatar, which is, of course, not a lot of detail, but good to hear. We know that some aspects of Star Wars productions slowed down while Bob Chapek was the CEO of Disney, and that is being essentially reversed under Bob Iger, because Bob Iger certainly seemed to know how to handle these sorts of licenses, or at least wanted to make the most of them and keep them moving along and producing good material on an ongoing basis. So I think that's good news on the whole.
Yes, Iger really understands that you can't throttle creativity and you can't just sort of reduce it down to a bank balance and sort of numbers and profits and all that kind of stuff. You have to let the creative process lie in the hands of the creative people. So I'm really hoping that we start to see Iger's effect come into play here, especially relating to Star Wars series and movies, that it isn't just, let's cut some corners, let's trim that one off the to-do list.
No, and
that they're going to get back into sort of
and
investing.
Also that it will come through with a sort of an umbrella strategy tying it all together.
Yes.
And there's sort of rumours, speculation, I'm not sure necessarily what it might be founded on, but I certainly believe it's plausible and we're hopeful for it that there will be a bit more information about the ongoing movie strategy and timelines coming out at the Star Wars Celebration event in April. That's from the 7th to the 10th of April.
Certainly Disney has seen that there is money to be made from going to the movies again with the release of this Avatar sequel. And we're seeing them sort of picking up pace with some of the Marvel properties with Wakanda Forever and the imminent Quantumania Ant-Man sequel. So I think that'll give them much more confidence that, yes, they can release big special effects heavy box office hits. So hopefully that will have a flow-on effect into bringing Star Wars back into the theatres as well.
Right, we've got a couple of bite-sized bits of information about upcoming series. Andor Season 2 filming. There's some reports of some upcoming filming locations. We don't need to go into too much detail in terms of what spoilers these might imply. But it's nice to know, as we often say in these podcasts, that these things are happening in real time and what that means in terms of production. The McLaren Technology Centre in Woking was used for the Coruscant spaceport in Season 1 of Andor, and it's going to be revisited for Season 2. I guess that's not too much of a spoiler, not that we'll be returning to Coruscant, but like I say, it's fun to know that these things are taking place and that we'll be returning to those specific locations. There's also word that some Andor Season 2 filming will be taking place in Valencia in Spain. The details are sparse, but this information comes by way of the fact that casting of extras is well underway. That'll be an interesting one. Some interesting potential scenery in Valencia in Spain. We know that it's been used for some that Spain has been used for some interesting locations in the prequel trilogy in the past. And it is kind of, I saw a little bit of a reference to this online, kind of funny that everyone else is focusing on the use of the volume and the interesting effects that you can get out of it. Meanwhile, Tony Gilroy's all sort of, I want to go to Spain. We need to shoot these scenes in Spain, etc.
Yeah, I mean, both different approaches to filmmaking. You know, the volume lets people do things on a budget and quickly, but there is something nostalgic in my heart about filming in locations, particularly ones that make me think of the prequels. You know, they filmed a lot across Europe, particularly for some of the locations centered on Naboo. So it'll be really interesting to see. I love the fans going through and IDing the filming locations, you know, and putting together the big jigsaw puzzle of, you know, spy photos and casting rumors and actually seeing the places in the finished product as well and putting it all together. Because we do enjoy visiting filming locations, you know, around the world. You know, still got a few to tick off on our bucket list. But I think that that's a fun thing for fans, you know, knowing that these places exist. It's a little tangible piece of Star Wars, you know. You're not in the movie, but you're there standing where it was made.
It can be surprisingly immersive because when they use on location filming, it's typically because they need the full 360-degree environment. It's not pointing one direction like a set necessarily, or even the volume, which is sort of limited in some ways. But yeah, it can be quite immersive because it surrounds you and envelops you. Other small bits and pieces, the Acolyte filming is underway. Actor Lee Jang-jae confirms that he's shooting through till April. And we know that the Acolyte's at this rate not likely to be hitting Disney Plus screens until quite a bit later down the line compared to some of the other materials, but fun to hear that is ticking along. Jon Favreau did an interview in the Variety magazine, and that is available online in reference to Skeleton Crew, which has been created by Marvel's Spider-Man director Jon Watts. Jon Favreau is executive producing that series. Jude Law stars in the series, which has been described as a Spielberg-esque coming-of-age story set in the same Mandalorian era. Skeleton Crew is scheduled to air this year, but no confirmed date yet for that. And the information we get from this Jon Favreau interview is that unlike the Boba Fett and Ahsoka characters from the Skeleton Crew will not appear elsewhere first, so it'll all be fresh characters that we see in Skeleton Crew.
It is interesting that he says will not first appear, which does sort of leave the door open to some sort of like crossover later on when we are familiar with the Skeleton Crew. And I think that that's a clever idea. You could introduce the characters of Boba Fett and Ahsoka in The Mandalorian to the wider audience because all the fans know who these characters are. They don't need their whole series to sort of introduce them. Yeah. With the Skeleton Crew, I think we need a lot to sort of bed down and introduce these characters without it feeling like a spin-off from The Mandalorian. But I think it could be interesting if there is maybe an episode later down the line where there is the cross parts, because they've chosen the Mandalorian era for a specific reason. Yeah,
well, he very much leaves the door open for the use of these characters, and I'll come to that in a couple of quotes that appeared in this interview. He says that each storyteller brings their own personality to the episodes of the Skeleton Crew. The groups that are working on Skeleton Crew are led by Jon Watts, who he collaborated with on the Spider-Man movies. Favreau says this has been a real fun time, and the great filmmakers that he's engaged with have been bringing their perspectives as well. Interestingly, he says there's always an opportunity when you have a set of characters and stories that people connect with that you could cross media into different areas, kind of implying that these characters could be reused through different channels down the line. Marvel does it quite effectively, he says. It's just a matter of where our time should be spent and what the appetite of the audience is. With all these stories we're telling, it definitely is a full-time job just keeping this going with what we're doing now. Television has a much different rhythm and schedule than film does.
Yes, well, we can only just imagine just how busy Favreau is these days with all the different Star Wars projects. He is heavily involved in a number of them, and obviously Disney would probably put a lot of emphasis on The Mandalorian behind the scenes because that is a pretty big breadwinner for the Disney Plus stable of sort of headline shows. You know, people used to talk about, you know, that basically carried Disney Plus subscriptions on its back with that huge, success of season one.
Particularly now that we're a couple of series into it, you know, across the board with Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett and or Obi-Wan Kenobi, there's some really good Star Wars material for subscribers to get stuck into, and I think that's quite attractive for Star Wars fans.
I think sometimes perhaps the story path of Grogu is probably perhaps a little bit different than what has sort of eventuated now in season 3. I guess we'll never know whether the storytellers and writers actually intended for Grogu and Din Djarin to be together this long. But I dare say it's probably come up from the head honchos at Disney to not write that character out, to keep finding ways for these two to stay together. But obviously it's introducing us to some really interesting stories.
Well, on that specific note, there is a clip that's come out on the official, from season 3 on the official Star Wars YouTube channel, and I won't delve into spoilers if you want to avoid that, but that reference is specifically made to that basically Din Djarin has completed his quest of trying to take Grogu to the Jedi in terms of meeting Luke and Grogu undergoing some training with Luke, but he says that, you know, the child Grogu has come back to him, so he's now, that quest is over and they're just on a path as a clan of two on an ongoing basis, it would seem. But we'll find out very shortly when season 3 debuts on Disney Plus on March the 1st. Star Wars Young Jedi Adventures is an animated series due to hit at Disney Plus in the not too distant future. This is the series that's aimed at preschool children. We mention it now because StarWars.com published an article that has a few images of the characters and some small additional details about that. This won't be appealing to everybody unless you're the sort of person that just wants to consume all Star Wars material that's out there, and that probably describes us fairly well personally. But 2 new images from the series have been revealed. One features Master Yoda, who will be featuring in this Young Jedi Adventures series. Jedi younglings Kai, Lise, and Nubs, and their friends Nash and the droid RJ-83 on a new planet called Tenu. There's a second image that shows some of those characters, Lise, Kai, and Nubs, during a training sequence. And we can sort of see they're very stylized, cute animated characters that will quite attention-grabbing for the preschoolers and sort of start to engage them in the ways of the Force.
Yeah, clearly I am not the target audience of this show, but I am still keen to check it out. I particularly like the cute little sort of galactic pals, the ones that are sort of centered around animals and stuff, but they are very short. Looking forward to sort of more long format animation, and it's a different style of animation that we haven't really seen in the Star Wars space before, but clearly sort of fits very well in with that sort of the preschool sort of. Obviously Disney's very well experienced in this, the shows like Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and all those kind of things have, been proven to be very successful for Disney. They obviously want to plug in other IPs like Star Wars into that
to that young age group,
yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. If you've got young kids yourself, you may be introducing them to it via this medium and perhaps looking over their shoulder as it's screening. Empire Magazine, April 2023. The cover features The Mandalorian. There's 2 alternate covers of that, focusing on The Mandalorian Season 3. And as often happens with the Empire Magazine, they have a series of internal articles and interviews that they release over a period of a week or so. There's a really good interview there with Katie Sackhoff out so far, where she describes some of her experiences historically on The Mandalorian and on Season 3 moving forward, and a couple of other interviews with Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. I believe an interview with Emily Swallow may be coming up. I haven't seen that one online yet, but that may be being released in the next day or so. Katie Sackhoff talks about Mandalorian Season 3. She says it's been over 10 years now that since she first played the Mandalorian warrior Bo-Katan in the Star Wars universe. Well, the character's live-action debut came in Season 2 of The Mandalorian, with Sackhoff herself donning Bo-Katan's armor. Her history with the character goes right back to 2012, when she was introduced in the Clone Wars animated series. Sackhoff says, "I've lived in this woman's skin for a long time. One of the things that John and I focus on is where she is in the moment, what peppers her experience. John and Rick every single day defer to me, which is a crazy experience. To have these masters asking me what I feel," I assume that's Rick Famuyiwa, the director. "It respects the craft and the years that I've put in," says Sackhoff. "I really do know her. Her pain is my pain. When she experiences something, I really feel it." So, yeah, she's done some interesting characters along the way, and she does seem to be the sort of person that does engage and embody the characters that she portrays in quite a significant way, and that seems to be the case with Bo-Katan.
Yeah, I mean, most actors wouldn't really think about, revisiting characters so far down the track, but we see that a lot in pop culture, especially with the sort of the likes of Marvel and Star Wars really trying to keep characters portrayed by the same people, a sort of continuity, and we're seeing that more in sort of animation, live action, TV series crossing over. And I like the loyalty there, and I like that it gives actors and performers a chance to really sort of dive deeper into the characters. I think us as fans really like to know the small details and, all the little details that sort of fill out these characters and their backstories and things like that. I really like the character of Bo-Katan. I was so excited when she got brought into the live action world in The Mandalorian, and I'm so excited to hear that how sort of connected to the character Katie Sackhoff feels. You feel it on screen, and I really do like especially when it's characters I enjoy, but for any Star Wars character, I really like hearing how much the actors feel sort of attached and connected to characters. That it wasn't just yet another acting gig that they did. They walked in, did their job, and walked off, I think
it conveys how much of an understanding they have that character is significant to the fans as well, in some ways.
Yeah. She's obviously had a sort of a track history of sort of sci-fi and fandoms tracing back to her work on Battlestar Galactica. So I like that she appreciates, that fans really do sort of connect with these characters. And it feels like you can sort of trust an actor to do well when they sort of appreciate the weight that's going to go behind these. in terms of the fan reactions and wanting them to be sort of really good. It's always a little bit risky when you bring in a beloved character into a new franchise, as it were. The Mandalorian is still pretty new in the realm of the scope of Star Wars, and she goes back, like she says, more than 10 years, and bringing a sort of a beloved character, especially a Mandalorian character. There is all these sorts of complex threads going on there with her storyline in the Clone Wars and bringing it in here. I really hope she gets a decent amount of screen time in season 3. I'm really hoping to see her have sort of like a crucial, without, giving too many spoilers away, hoping you're all caught up on season 2 before season 3 hits. But I'm hoping that her storyline ends up being a significant one in season 3.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, she's pretty prominent in the trailers, as is her Gauntlet fighter, her starship, which is cool to see. I like the design of that vehicle. So yeah, I think there'll be some interesting interactions and story development for Bo-Katan and Katie Sackhoff in season 3 of The Mandalorian. We've also got some quick game news, book news, and comic news to discuss. Last week, I think it was in the podcast, we talked about the gameplay video that had been revealed for Star Wars Jedi Survivor. More information about that game, which is due out in late April of this year, has come out via IGN.com, focusing on combat stances and in an article, but also a video about some of the mob enemies that you may be facing when playing that game. So they focus on droids in particular. We won't delve into the spoilers. There are one or two spoilers about characters and species that do show up in there, but it's worth watching if you're not too spoiler averse. So if you watch that, you'll see some of the versions of droids that you may be familiar with in the game, and some of which even have some action figures coming out, specific Jedi Survivor versions of those action figures.
I thought it was fun, without going into spoilers. Most of the droids and the things that we see there are ones that we are familiar with, but I like the sort of the versions that they have for this game. Everyone wants to give their little feel to it. And of course, that certainly works out from a merchandising standpoint. Doing subtle variations of droids that we know means that Hasbro can pump out a few repaints. But I thought this was fun. If you have played the other ones, there won't be spoilers in this. If you're thinking about jumping in and playing this one and you haven't played the first one, there might be a little bit of spoilers just for some of the... The
essence of the video is mainly talking about trash mobs, about group mobs that you'd be fighting, not main villains.
No.
But there is at least one species in the background that I won't mention the name of here that is a bit of a spoiler.
Yeah. So if you're keen and you've played the first game, do check it out. It gives you a little bit of a hint. It's certainly exciting. And I do like the designs that they revealed. I thought it was really cool. They spoke to the designers and sort of talked about the process behind, giving droids a sort of a new look for the game and things like that, and showed some of the combat and some hints at how you might take them on in game.
Yeah, well, they talk about the weaponry that droids might have available that humans and humanoid opponents may not have, and how that will impact gameplay. We talked about the upcoming Akira Crimson Dawn novel. Also sort of leaked a little bit is that another From a Certain Point of View compilation novels will be coming out in September of this year. This one will be focusing on the stories of Return of the Jedi. So this is the third in the From a Certain Point of View publications, where they compile together a series of short stories from different authors, focusing on the events of the original trilogy movies so far, but telling them from the points of view of background characters and characters that may not have appeared fully on screen. I enjoy these books on the whole, and it's not surprising that the Return of the Jedi 1 is coming out this year, being the 40th anniversary of that movie.
Yeah, if you remember or enjoyed the very old Tales from a sort of series like Tales from Jabba's Palace and that sort of thing, I think these ones will appeal to you. There are some really interesting stories, and you get different flavors with the different authors in the mix. They're definitely just nice sort of bite-sized reads if you're not somebody that has a lot of time or just the sort of attention to sit down and read a whole thick novel. These are fun. Just sort of bite-sized Star Wars stories to jump into. So I'm quite excited about this one coming up.
Also, sort of, I guess, on a similar topic, Kevin Scott is writing a new graphic novel for Dark Horse called Star Wars Tales from Death Star. So we published as a single graphic novel in September, and it seems to be taking on that sort of short story compilation type style as well, but produced in a comic format. The synopsis for this graphic novel reads, "From the destruction of Alderaan to the shadow of the forest moon, alien creatures, phantom starships, deadly artifacts, and vengeful spirits all stalk the halls of the infamous space station." As writer Kevin Scott, who also wrote Tales from the Rancor Pit and has contributed significantly to Star Wars The High Republic, and an all-star team of artists reveal the hidden evils that lurked within the charred remains of the ultimate firepower in the universe. So this will be fun to see in graphic novel format, a different style to a text-only novel, and we'll see some interpretations of tales related to the Death Star. Alright, let's talk about local store reports, things that are showing up on the shelves here in New Zealand. A couple of Andor figures in the 3.75-inch vintage collection scale are finally available. They are shipping from Mighty Ape in particular. You can get Cassian Andor and Val Sartha right now. We'll put links down below. Some new Star Wars Body Vibe lightsaber jewelry is in stock and shipping from Mighty Ape. This includes necklaces based on the lightsabers of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. You've seen these in person and you're a bit of a fan of Body Vibe on the whole. Do you want to tell us about those?
Yeah, Body Vibe's been making Star Wars jewelry for, going on 7 or 8 years now. Their stuff is always quite highly rated in my book, often made from stainless steel and sort of surgical grade materials, so they don't sort of tarnish or wear with age. And they do lightsabers pretty well, I think. Lightsabers are a common choice for pendant designs. They lend themselves very well. And of course, you can't really go past the classic hilt designs of Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. And that obviously ties into the recent Obi-Wan Kenobi series as well. So they're definitely worth checking out. We don't get a lot of the officially licensed Star Wars jewelry in New Zealand. Mighty Ape is one of the sort of lone stockists there. So if you want to add a little bit of Star Wars bling to your wardrobe, certainly check them out.
We've been following the availability of licensed Star Wars skateboards, in particular the line from Element brand, for a while now, and have just noticed that via the store Hyperride on the market, those decks have been significantly reduced. You can get quite a wide range of Star Wars styles of complete skateboards and decks, ranging from about $71 and upwards. So check those out. We'll put links for those as well below. These are great for display. We have quite a few of these on display in our personal collection. And yeah, some really cool graphics, and it's a slightly different way to get Star Wars up on your wall if you want to display them. Well, of course you can. You can use them and wear them in if that's the way you want to celebrate Star Wars as well.
It's great to see local stockists of items such as these. In the past, there have been a variety of different licensed Star Wars skateboards, but they're generally quite big, heavy, bulky things to import if you definitely want to sort of add them to your collection. So it's great to see, them being more widely available in New Zealand. And so if you've been eyeing them for a while, grabbing them on sale is definitely an exciting way to sort of add out your collection a little bit more.
Yeah, you can get them over from Australia via the Element store in Australia, the official store, but they come in about $140 plus. There might be free shipping on that, to be honest. But yeah, like I say, via the market, those are currently heavily reduced. And I think that $70 to $80 price point is very, very attractive. We talked about the Star Wars Micro Galaxies Squadron Boonta Eve Battle Pack that showed up strangely in New Zealand but not anywhere else in the world. This is the Pod Racer pack of Anakin Skywalker's Pod Racer and Sebulba's Pod Racer, available at the warehouse for $45. When we last talked about it, it wasn't available online, but since then it has shown up and you can now grab it via the warehouse.co.nz website if you haven't been able to find it in your local store directly.
It's good because this one is individually listed. It is not an assorted, case pack here. So you don't need to wonder about whether you'll get a random one or the one that you want. They do seem to be stocked in cases of 4 at local stores, but we know that not everyone has a warehouse branch close by or is able to get there. And certainly 4 is not a lot, if you happen to live in a neighborhood with a few other Star Wars collectors. So great that you can buy them online now.
Yeah, so that's pretty easy one to hunt for. We'll put links below, but it's pretty easy to hunt for on the warehouse.co.nz. Now we're going to talk about a couple of episodes of The Bad Batch because a little over a week ago now, a week and a half ago, episodes 7 and 8 screened back-to-back on Wednesday night in New Zealand. I'll run through the synopses for both of these because I think when we talk about them, the story overflows a little bit between the two episodes, and that's why they were released simultaneously. They're definitely a double episode that needs to be watched together. So episode 7, The Clone Conspiracy, and episode 8, Truth and Consequences. The first one did not have the Bad Batch in at all. It very much felt like just an extension of the Clone Wars, and it really, I enjoyed both of these, but that really did just leave me thinking and realizing how much Clone Wars material and how much of a solid and long-standing franchise the Clone Wars is in general. You can really appreciate that some people have come into Star Wars via the Clone Wars in its entirety, and it's cool to see that it's just ongoing in the form of the Bad Batch. But that first episode, The Clone Conspiracy, did not have the Bad Batch in it, and the Imperial Senate Rampart pushes for the passing of a bill authorizing the military recruitment of Imperial citizens, meaning that the clones will be officially discarded. Senator Ryo Chuchi defends the clones' fundamental rights, and she happens later to be approached by clone trooper Slip. Chuchi begins to investigate Rampart's conspiracy, but just as she tries to convince Slip to testify, a hidden assassin kills him. Before Chuchi can suffer the same fate, she's rescued by Captain Rex, who Slip had previously summoned for help, but he didn't make it in time to help Slip directly. The assassin was an unnamed clone, an identifiable clone. He kills himself before he is able to be questioned for information. Following on from that, Rex contacts the Bad Batch in episode 8 and asks them to join him and Chuchi to tells them about Rampart's plot. They need to gather evidence against Rampart. Rex asks Bad Batch to retrieve Slip's copy of Rampart's command log from Rampart's Venator-class Star Destroyer, which happens to be undergoing maintenance on Coruscant. While Omega accompanies Chuchi, who tries to get support from more senators, Rex and the rest of the Bad Batch sneak aboard the cruiser to retrieve the data, but trigger an alarm and barely escape. The following morning, Chuchi accuses Rampart in front of the entire Senate, and just in time the evidence reaches her. Rampart is arrested when it is revealed to the entire Senate that the Venator-class Star Destroyers were in fact responsible for the destruction of Tapoka City. Emperor Palpatine makes a very grand entrance at this point. He personally orders the Imperial Recruitment Bill to be passed, despite the efforts of Bad Batch and Chuchi, proving that this was his goal all along. Before the Bad Batch leave Coruscant, Echo decides to stay with Rex and Chuchi to help fighting for the clones' rights. So there was a lot of political maneuvering. There was that sort of episode that very much had the prequel movie type of complexity and feel to it, which I very much enjoyed. I enjoy that change in pace from some of the smaller adventures or more action-oriented adventures, because you can get quite a lot more complex storytelling into the mix, and that's very much what we got out of these episodes. There was a lot of development in terms of the overall direction that the Empire is going, but there were also some really interesting hidden loose ends, particularly related to that unnamed assassin clone, some sort of story going on there about who he was and how he came to be operating under these circumstances. That leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Obviously, he was working with Rampart or instructed by Rampart, but why someone may have manipulated a clone in this manner. The clone also referred to himself as a believer and told Rex, who he recognized that he was on the wrong path and fighting for the wrong side, which has some interesting implications in there.
Yeah, these episodes were so connected, I was almost surprised not to see them sort of saying part 1, part 2. And I think it was really interesting that even though we know that, Palpatine is Emperor of, the Galactic Empire, he's still not done with his scheming. There is still a lot of sort of threads that he is controlling and still just sort of manipulating things. So no one's ever really sort of coming up directly against him. And he's using a lot of pawns in play to do work, that really master manipulator that's getting people to do things that they think is their idea, things that they are passionate about. But by
the end of it, I wasn't actually sure if Rampart had been just trying to advance his own personal trajectory all along, or if he'd been fully manipulated as a pawn from Palpatine from the get-go. Because Palpatine set up a win-win scenario where if Rampart succeeded or failed, Palpatine would get what he wanted out of the situation.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting because we know that was basically how the Clone Wars began. You know, he was controlling both sides, so no matter which side won, he would come out sort of in control. And we still see that he still has these grand plans because we have yet to sort of really hit the Stormtrooper mark. And this is the time where we see that, where he finally announces the sort of the Imperial Stormtroopers and that the clones are going to be phased out. And it's kind of sad to see the Bad Batch realize that they kind of played into his hand, that this was his plan all along, and that kind of doesn't bode very well for any of the clones. We kind of left with this sort of, I don't know, this sort of sinking feeling that we don't really know, you know, how the fate of the clones is going to play out from this. We've always felt a little bit, you know, on edge about the Bad Batch because they're putting themselves in some risky situations. We know that the Empire is gunning for them, but this kind of puts a little bit of an uneasy tone. We saw that Rampart basically, you know, said, yes, we'll give them all sort of pension plans, we'll look after them, we'll give them rights and all this kind of stuff. But we know that that was just to kind of get Senator Tucci to stop looking and stop fussing about it. You know, he was just like, he was saying,
couldn't necessarily trust his promises by any stretch.
And he's not in control. He's been arrested. Yep. So we know that any promises he made about looking after them, you know, whether they were, you know, false or, you know, true in intent, doesn't actually matter anymore.
One plot point that kind of struck me, and if I've interpreted it correctly, leaves me a little bit curious. It was kind of implied that part of the reason Rampart destroyed Taboka City was to stop the ongoing production of clones, kind of implying that they were still being produced and trained and being used as the military force of the Republic. Hadn't really personally thought or put a lot of thought into them coming off the Taboka City production line per se on an ongoing basis, and resulting in the necessity of having to, from Rampart's point of view, of having Taboka City destroyed to halt that production and to force the switch over to the recruitment of stormtroopers.
Because we know that they had been siphoning money away from it, you know, obviously to slow it down. To slow it down,
for his own needs, yeah.
But I guess they figured that at some point there'd be too many questions that would raise too many flags, and they just needed something a little more concrete to end it, because they might not have been able to sort of convince the Senate to do it. So they basically found a way, whether it was Palpatine's plan all along or whether it just kind of naturally evolved using the ambitions of, you know, people in the higher ranking positions in the Empire to kind of use them to sort of puppet his way. We don't know fully why the Emperor wants stormtroopers recruits as opposed to the clones. But I get the feeling that the Bad Batch future episodes is really going to help us understand that.
Yeah.
We don't see episodes from Palpatine's viewpoint.
Not yet, no.
It's very centered on...
He very much came into on the tail end of these episodes.
Yeah. We don't see things from his perspective like we did in the prequels, where we see his secret conversations with Darth Maul and Count Dooku. So we don't get quite that one. We do get a little bit of some of the Empire, like we see Rampart and Mas Amedda talking in the hallway, and we sort of get a little bit of the Imperial scheming there, but not Palpatine. He's this kind of this elusive Grandmaster, as they reference that he doesn't really turn up for Senate sort of hearings or discussions anymore. And they're just like, oh, he just wants the senators to decide what's best, you know, making it seem like it's all that he's not wanting to be too controlling and leaving it up to the senators to decide. But we know it's because he doesn't want to draw attention or to sort of play his hand in a way that will possibly give people a way to undermine his total authority. So
I'm left presuming that from Palpatine's point of view, wiping the slate clean every now and then is a way to ensure loyalty of the forces beneath you. I mean, he directly used he scapegoated effectively the clones in entirety as being untrustworthy, because he said they were the ones that actually followed orders to destroy Taboka City as well, to fire on their own. But so I think I don't know if he truly doubts their loyalty or just wants a clean slate to sort of enhance the loyalty of the troops. But either way, we know that he's got what he wants, and that enhances his strength and his positioning overall, which is, well, we know where it goes, obviously, but it feels quite sinister in the moment.
Yeah. We don't really even need a reason why Palpatine wants stormtroopers. We just know that we have to get from clone troopers in the prequels to stormtroopers in the original trilogy.
I think we are going to hear a little bit more about that over the next few episodes.
I think it would be a really interesting sort of puzzle piece to give fans. And of course, I was especially happy to see Ian McDiarmid coming in to voice those pivotal scenes. Obviously, all of the voice work in Star Wars animation has always been great. You know, there have been plenty of talented voice actors, but there is just something about the way that Ian sort of revels in the Palpatine role.
Just the really precise, slow pacing of his delivery. That combined with the grandeur of Palpatine's entrance into the Senate just made those sort of near closing scenes of that episode very, very impactful and significant.
You almost forget that you're watching animation in some of those scenes. It felt so much like him as we see him on screen. It was really quite cool.
The other thing that's kind of feeling that really kind of stood out to me in terms of the overall vibe is the number of clones that are still just there. They were just in Coruscant in the after hours officers mess sort of thing. And the fact that they want to keep active, they were talking about wanting to keep active, even if it's just, quelling insurgencies. They want to contribute because that is what their life has been. And it implies that it's not a problem from, some people's point of view, that it can be swept under the rug. There's quite a lot of clones out there that want to be active, and it's going to make for some interesting storytelling over the next few episodes, I think. Yeah,
when Senator Chuchi and Rampart are talking, he makes reference to basically paying the pension out for millions of clones. We know that there are millions. And they are effectively sort of homeless. They don't have their home world on Kamino anymore. They weren't really sort of native to Kamino. They don't really have
sort of like existed in a military structure, and
they don't have a home world where they can just go and retire.
They don't have resources. They've always just lived as employees
they don't even sort
of the empire.
There's no real reference to even sort of having a pay.
No.
They just they do their job as soldiers. They get what they need in terms of housing and food and supplies and stuff like that. And when she's talking to them about what are your needs, they don't even really seem to be able to...
They don't have a plan for what they're going to do when they get too old to fight.
Yeah, they just don't even sort of... It's so deeply programmed in them that they are soldiers, and they can't think of anything else. And you can see them just sort of stewing on Coruscant, that they're just like, I want to be out there basically just wanting to fight. Not really even I think one of them says that they're not even really programmed to think about what happens after.
No. And the fact that we saw many of them questioning what they've done and why they're here, and that reference to millions means that it's a very big issue that needs some sort of storytelling resolution moving forward, I think.
I liked bringing back Senator Chuchi, who appeared in some episodes in the Clone Wars many years ago. I thought it was fun. It made that first episode, The Clone Conspiracy, feel very much like just a straight Clone Wars episode.
Just set after the conclusion of the literal Clone Wars, that's all.
Yeah, because we're still dealing with clones. We're still sort of dealing with the senators and things. And it kind of makes me sad, when you sort of think that this is the time point where Padme Amidala is no longer with us, because it felt like Chuchi was the kind of the senator that would be doing what Padme would be doing if she was still alive. And we see the involvement of Senator Organa in these scenes.
Very cool.
Sort of pulling together, working with those senators that are still trying to do good in the world. We see a couple of senators that are very, very clearly, under the Emperor's thumb. They're kind of just towing the line and doing. We see them trying to basically kick her out.
Chuchi didn't have much support other than Bail Organa at all.
No.
So I was fortunate. I mean, when the Bad Batch comes along, and Omega was helping directly with Chuchi and interacting directly with Bail Organa. So those were cool scenes to see.
And we had the disgraced Kaminoan senator who was also from episodes of the Clone Wars. And another little aspect to the sort of double episode that I thought was interesting was there's a number of times where Omega mentions that she's a clone.
Mm-hmm.
And I start to wonder how widespread that knowledge is, that there is basically a different clone running around, that she is alive, because she says that in front of a Kaminoan that didn't seem to know that she was a clone.
No,
she just referenced her as a child.
The camera specifically paused long enough for that reaction or that lack of reaction to really sink in for the audience. They made it quite clear that her announcement, Omega's announcement that she was a clone, did not register at all as significant or known facts with the senator.
Yeah, so it makes me wonder whether we're going to see a little bit more of that. You know, people have sort of wondered what would happen if people knew that there was sort of like a slightly sort of purer original, because she is aging at a normal rate compared to the other clones. She is like Boba Fett, but we still don't really know why that very small sort of secretive batch of Kaminoans made Omega. What her intent was, like, was she a specific purpose? Was she just a pet project? And whether there could be, you know, factors out there that are still looking for her, or would scheme something having learned of her existence. It may be a dead end now that Tobacco City's gone. Whatever they had in mind just will never come to fruition, or there may be a much more significant story from Omega's point of view as to who she is and why she was created, and what that may or may not mean moving forward in the absence of the other Kaminoans and the production line, the clone production facilities. I'm sure we've talked about that in previous podcasts, and I think we will undoubtedly talk about it in the future. I did actually like Omega's role in this episode. It wasn't big, but she was very much invested in helping the clones, obviously because she is a clone, she sees them as brothers, but I like the way that she bonded very quickly and closely with Senator Chuchi and even Bail Organa in terms of helping them and relating to them. And I really want to see her story develop, and I want to see her mature and where they go, not just in terms of her reason for being in there, but just from a personal point of view, how her story develops. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because we know that she is essentially as close to sort of a sister to Boba Fett as one could get. They are essentially both clones of Jango, but because Boba was sort of raised alongside Jango, that's where his trajectory and path went. And we see him in the Clone Wars, and he has a very different world view. He's very cynical, and he gets straight sort of into sort of, the world of crime and bounty hunting. Yeah. And because Omega has grown up around the clones, she is very much more, she doesn't have the same, or at least we assume, not the same programming like clone troopers, but she's very much sort of on an opposite trajectory. She wants to do good. Every time there is a situation in front of her, she wants to help people, and she's very kind-hearted and trustworthy, and she's very trusting.
Yeah, and that contrast is a very interesting point. I agree.
And it would be, I want to know where the showrunners want to take her, and I'm hoping we get sort of like this really long, sort of interesting story arc for her. I think she's a really interesting character, figuring out that, oh yeah, there's another sort of pure clone, but this one's a girl, and where that might go. And we get some really sweet moments. We see her meditating at the start of the episode, that she was sort of taught to by the Jedi Padawan Gunji in the previous episode. And she's just sort of learning to be still. She's absorbing a lot from the world around her because she's been very sheltered most of her life with the Kaminoans on Kamino, and she's sort of absorbing and learning from different people that she meets along her way. And then we get this sort of sad moment where she's talking to Echo, saying, oh, perhaps you'd like to meditate. And he was like, no, I did enough of being alone. And I should have seen it coming, that sort of special moment between the two of them, because we see Omega more directly involved with the sort of the original Bad Batch members. We've got Hunter, Tech, and Wrecker still here. We didn't see quite as much with her and Echo quite as much.
Not on a personal level like that, no.
So it should have resonated that, something might happen to Echo in this episode, and it wasn't bad, but we see him moving off to help Rex. And I think it would be fun if we get a little bit, a few more threads that we see a little bit more about what Rex is going to do.
Well, I think we have to.
Especially since we know that the future of the clone troopers is now quite up in the air, now that it's basically like, oh yeah, we don't need you guys anymore. So Rex is going to have his hands full helping them all. And obviously Echo is a little bit more aligned with sort of the classic clone troopers.
Echo, Rex plus Chuchi as a trio, that's a very strong storytelling trajectory and narrative. I think just leaving that as a background and presumed is a little bit of a lost opportunity. I do hope that we see directly what they get up to, and then they cross paths again with Bad Batch in a concrete way, maybe by the end of the season.
Yeah, I thought that these episodes were really important. I think we had a few of those sort of one episode, self-contained sort of adventure ones, and now we're really starting to get into the main sort of plot points for this season, and it just makes me very, very excited about where we're going to sort of gather momentum to for the season finale. Now, going through those episodes, watched them a couple of times now, I guess it's time for us to catch up now that we have internet and electricity again, and watch the most recent episode of Bad Batch, episode 9. Very excited. And we'll be talking about that one in next week's podcast.
On that note, though, that's about it for today's installment. I guess we're done doing talking. If you've got any thoughts on the topics we discussed today, we're definitely keen to hear them. Leave a comment on the YouTube page or our website page for this podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to us share our passion for Star Wars. Stay tuned to our website, SWNZ.co.nz, for Star Wars news for New Zealanders, and another podcast episode next week and each week thereafter. Don't forget, you can jump on over to either our Facebook group or the SWNZ message boards to discuss all the latest Star Wars news with other Kiwi fans. Kia noho haumaru, thank you for listening and stay safe.
Turou Hawaiki, may the Force be with you.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, go ahead and like the video, check out the SWNZ Podcast playlist for our other episodes, and subscribe for alerts about new episodes. See you next time.